In the middle of a brutal snowstorm in Chicago, a struggling black woman stumbled upon a stranger trapped in a luxury car. Without hesitation, she risked her job, her safety, and everything she had left to help. Afterward, she walked away, expecting nothing in return. What she didn't know was that her kindness hadn't been forgotten. 4 days later, just when she was at her lowest point, the white man she had saved showed up at her door with an offer that would change her life forever. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts. The wind howled like a pack of angry wolves, slashing through the narrow, crumbling streets of Chicago's South Side, carrying sharp pellets of snow that stung the skin like tiny needles. Marcia Brown pulled the frayed hood of her tattered jacket tighter over her head, but it was a losing battle against the ferocity of the storm. Her hands, covered only by thin, worn-out gloves, were nearly numb, and every step she took across the ice-slick sidewalks was a careful, painful negotiation between balance and exhaustion. The buildings around her loomed like tired old giants, their bricks stained and cracked from decades of neglect, their windows either boarded up or dimly lit, casting sickly yellow glows onto the snow that piled up relentlessly against the doorway. Marcia, 32 years old, tall and wiry with a frame hardened by years of physical labor, moved quickly through the familiar maze of dilapidated apartment blocks and litter-strewn alleys. Despite the biting cold, her dark eyes burned with a quiet determination. She had deliveries to make, packages that needed to be dropped off before nightfall if she wanted to keep the few dollars she'd earned today. She couldn't afford to lose this job. Not now. Not when every cent counted toward keeping the lights on, keeping her little sister warm, keeping her fed, keeping the hospital bills from swallowing them both whole. Home was a tiny, crumbling one-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a building that smelled perpetually of mildew and old cooking oil. Inside, the air was thin and cold, the heat barely functioning, but Marcia had done what she could. She had taped up the windows with cardboard and duct tape, laid extra blankets around, and placed a space heater next to the battered twin bed where her sister, Tiana, lay bundled up under a mountain of covers. Tiana was only 10 years old, her body frail from a spinal condition that left her unable to walk, her wide brown eyes filled with a mixture of fierce intelligence and heartbreaking fragility. Before she had left for work that afternoon, Marcia had sat by her side, stroking her thin hair, promising her she would bring home something special. A new coloring book, maybe, if she could find one cheap enough. Tiana had smiled at her, a small, tired smile that had made her chest ache with both love and helplessness. Now, as she trudged through the growing storm, Marcia couldn't shake the gnawing anxiety that had been coiled in her gut for days. Rumors were swirling at the delivery company. Cuts were coming. Jobs were on the line. Her name was near the top of the list. She knew it. She was expendable, just another face among thousands struggling to survive in a city that didn't care who you were, unless you had money or power. Still, even with the heavy weight pressing down on her, fear for Tiana, fear for their future, Marcia never stopped moving, never stopped pushing forward. Her heart, stubborn and scarred as it was, refused to let the bitterness of the world consume her. In the neighborhood, people knew her as the woman who would help carry your groceries up 3 flights of stairs, patch your leaky sink, shovel your front stoop clear of snow, all without expecting anything in return. Marcia didn't help because she thought it would lead to anything. She helped because it was the right thing to do. And deep down, she clung to the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, doing the right thing would mean something someday. As she made her way toward the next delivery, Marcia paused for a moment on a street corner, breathing hard, her chest rising and falling in the icy air. The snow had thickened to near whiteout conditions now, and the streetlights, haloed by the swirling flurries, looked like ghostly moons suspended in the darkness. She pulled her phone from her pocket to check the address again, but the battery was dying fast, the cold draining it with brutal efficiency. A group of teenagers hurried past her, heads down, their laughter sharp and hollow against the frozen night. A battered city bus lumbered by, its windows fogged up, the inside packed with weary faces staring blankly out. Somewhere in the distance, a police siren wailed, high and mournful. Marcia shoved the phone back into her pocket and pushed on, the snow crunching loudly under her boots, the cold gnawing at her bones. She had no idea that tonight, the simple act of kindness that defined her, the thing so many people saw as a foolish waste of time, would change her life forever. Marcia squinted through the blinding sheet of snow, her boots slipping slightly on the icy pavement as she trudged down the desolate side street, clutching the thin canvas delivery bag to her chest. Her breath came out in ragged puffs of white mist, and her heart pounded heavily under her layers of thin clothing. The storm had worsened in just minutes, turning the city into a swirling, featureless wasteland of white and gray. Visibility dropped to almost nothing, and Marcia knew she should turn back, find shelter, but the stubborn sense of duty that had been carved into her bones over years of hardship kept her moving forward. It was then, cutting through the howling wind and the endless whiteness, that she heard it. A sharp metallic screech, the desperate roar of an engine spinning uselessly. Tires screeching and skidding against the frozen asphalt. Marcia's head snapped toward the noise, instinct overriding the part of her brain that screamed at her to get home. She saw it through the blur of snow. A sleek, dark Mercedes sedan angled sharply across the road, its rear wheels buried deep in a mound of snow, the front grille dented where it had collided with a street lamp. Without thinking, Marcia hurried toward the car, her legs pumping through the knee-deep drifts, each step a battle against the freezing sludge that threatened to suck the boots right off her feet. As she approached, she could make out the figure inside. A man, white, middle-aged, dressed in an expensive-looking gray suit that was completely out of place in this part of town and in weather like this. The man was struggling to open the driver's side door, pounding against the window with a frustrated fist. Marcia slammed her palm against the glass to get the man's attention, shouting over the shrieking wind, "Hey, you okay in there?" The man's wide, panicked eyes locked onto Marcia's for a second, and then he managed to pop the door open with a grunt of effort. The blast of freezing air hit them both like a hammer. Marcia reached in, grabbing the man by the arm to steady him as he stumbled out of the vehicle. The man's face was pale, his hair mussed, a thin line of blood trickling from a cut above his eyebrow. His hands were shaking violently, and his expensive shoes were completely soaked. "Car's stuck," the man gasped, voice hoarse from either the cold or sheer panic. "Phone's dead, no signal." Marcia gave him a quick once-over. The man was clearly hurt, and judging by the way he leaned heavily against the open door, possibly in shock. Marcia's own heart twisted with sympathy, but survival instincts kicked in too. This wasn't a good neighborhood, especially not for a man like this stranded out in the open. And the temperature was dropping fast. If they didn't find shelter soon, both of them could be in serious trouble. All right, don't worry, I'll help you," Marcia said firmly, her voice steady even as her own hands trembled from the cold. Without waiting for a response, she stripped off her battered canvas backpack and dug around inside for the worn length of rope she always carried for emergencies. She moved fast, tying the rope to the back axle of the Mercedes, while the man leaned against the side of the car, teeth chattering, looking more lost than ever. Marcia gritted her teeth, muscles screaming as she tried to dig the tires free with her bare hands, the snow and slush numbing her further with every second. The wind roared around them, a constant howling monster that battered her from every side. Her breath came in gasping huffs, white against the dark, swirling air. She wrapped the rope around her waist and heaved, trying to pull the heavy car backward, the tires spinning helplessly, the frame barely budging. Suddenly, Marcia's foot slipped on a patch of hidden ice, and she went down hard onto her side, the impact knocking the breath out of her, her elbow scraping painfully against the rough street. For a second, stars exploded behind her eyes, and the temptation to just lie there, to let the cold swallow her, was almost overwhelming. But then she thought of Tiana, of her tiny, hopeful smile, of her frail hands squeezing hers that morning, and she forced herself back to her feet with a raw, guttural groan. The man in the suit shouted something, maybe an apology, maybe encouragement, but the wind ripped the words away before Marcia could hear them. She didn't need to hear, she just needed to move. Another heave, another grunt of exertion, and finally, miraculously, the car jolted free, rolling back a few precious feet onto clearer pavement. Marcia stumbled forward, chest heaving, sweat freezing against her skin. The man staggered toward her, grabbing Marcia's arm in a firm, grateful grip. Thank you, ma'am. I don't even—" the man stammered, his voice cracking with code and something deeper. Shock, maybe, or disbelief. Marcia forced a grin, though her whole body ached and her jacket now hung awkwardly, ripped badly at the shoulder from her fall. No problem, she managed, voice hoarse. But you need to get out of here fast. This storm's just getting started. The man nodded, still dazed, fumbling for his keys, but when he turned the ignition, the car sputtered and died with a horrible coughing noise. Dead. Marcia cursed under her breath, glancing around. No cars were passing, no lights were on in the houses nearby. The whole world seemed swallowed up by the storm. We can't stay here, Marcia said, her voice grim. If you stay in that car, you'll freeze to death. The man stared at her, lost. What do we do? Marcia thought quickly, heart hammering. She had seen a gas station a few blocks back near the main road. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. We walk, she said, already pulling the man's arm over her shoulder, half carrying him through the swirling blizzard. And as they struggled down the street, the snow stinging every inch of exposed skin, Marcia made a silent promise to herself, the same one she had made 1,000 times before. No matter what it cost her, she would not leave someone behind. The storm showed no mercy. The wind hammered against Marcia and the man with the force of a sledgehammer, stealing their breath, pushing them sideways with every step they tried to take. Snow lashed at their faces, blinding, burning, cutting like shards of glass against already chapped skin. Marcia gritted her teeth, digging deep into reserves of strength she wasn't even sure she had, half dragging the man along the frozen, deserted street, her boots slipping and sliding on the ice-coated asphalt. Every muscle screamed, every breath seared her lungs with cold fire, but she refused to stop. She could feel the man shivering violently against her, could hear his chattering teeth, and Marcia knew it wasn't just discomfort. It was the first signs of hypothermia, the body beginning to shut down. They had to get somewhere warm, fast, or this man wasn't going to make it. She knew it the same way she knew the cold hunger of going to bed without dinner, or the sharp fear of an eviction notice nailed to the door. As they struggled forward, Marcia's mind kept flashing back to the packages she was supposed to deliver, to the promises she had made to the foreman, to the unspoken threat that hung over her job if she screwed up even one more time. She could already see the fallout. No job, no money, no rent, no food, no medicine for Tiana. It wasn't just her own neck on the line, it was hers too. The stakes could not be higher, and they weighed on her like iron chains. She stumbled to a halt at the corner of an intersection, heart thundering, eyes stinging from the snow. She looked down at the man leaning heavily on her, his once pristine suit now caked with ice and grime, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. Marcia knew she was at a crossroads. Save her job by abandoning this stranger to whatever fate awaited him, or sacrifice everything to help someone she didn't even know. There was no real choice. Marcia muttered under her breath, almost in disbelief at her own stubbornness. Ain't no way I'm leaving you out here, man. Ain't no way. The man didn't respond. He was too far gone, staggering blindly wherever Marcia pulled him. Marcia tightened her grip around the man's waist and pushed forward, teeth clenched so hard her jaw ached. Up ahead, blurry through the thick wall of snow, Marcia spotted the faint flickering red neon of the gas station sign, like a lighthouse in the middle of a frozen hell. Relief flooded through her so hard it nearly buckled her knees. With a final desperate burst of strength, she hauled the man the last few yards to the gas station door and shouldered it open with a grunt, sending a flurry of snow into the dim, grimy interior. The heat inside hit them like a punch, thick and heavy and smelling faintly of burnt coffee and gasoline. An old man behind the counter looked up from a newspaper, his wrinkled face twisted in surprise at the sight of the two snow-covered figures collapsing through the entrance. Marcia guided the man to a battered plastic chair near a heater, easing him down gently. The man mumbled something incoherent, his eyes rolling back briefly before he sagged into the chair, shivering violently but alive. "Call an ambulance," Marcia rasped to the old man at the counter, voice raw and broken. "He needs help." The old man blinked, nodded, and reached for the phone. Marcia finally let herself sink onto the floor against the wall, chest heaving, arms trembling from exhaustion and cold. Her entire body ached, from the bruises on her hip to the deep, bone-chilling cold that had settled into her very marrow. She pulled off her torn jacket, now almost useless, and without thinking, without hesitation, she draped it over the man's shivering shoulders, leaving herself in just a threadbare hoodie that offered almost no protection from the cold still seeping under the door. She knew what this meant. Her deliveries were ruined, her job as good as gone. No excuses would save her. No one cared about why you failed, only that you did. But as Marcia sat there, shivering uncontrollably, watching the ambulance lights glow faintly through the swirling snow outside, she felt no regret, not a shred. She had done the right thing, even if it cost her everything. Marcia sat hunched on the cracked linoleum floor of the gas station for what felt like hours, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees, shivering violently as the adrenaline slowly drained from her body, leaving only bone-deep exhaustion and a gnawing cold that seemed to have fused with her very soul. She watched through half-lidded eyes as the paramedics arrived, bustling around the man in the suit, wrapping him in thick blankets, securing him onto a stretcher, their voices low and urgent but oddly distant, muffled by the roaring in Marcia's frozen ears. She tried to stand when one of them gestured toward her, but her legs wouldn't cooperate, trembling so badly she thought they might simply snap like brittle sticks. One of the paramedics, a woman with kind eyes and a face lined from years of seeing too much suffering, knelt beside her, pressing a warm hand to her forehead, muttering something about hypothermia. Marcia shook her head weakly, stubborn even now, waving her off, mumbling that she was fine, she just needed to get back to work, needed to make her deliveries. The paramedic frowned but didn't argue. Probably used to seeing pride like hers, even when it was about to kill a person. The ambulance doors slammed shut, carrying the stranger away into the swirling white, and then the gas station was quiet again, just the hum of the heater and the ticking of an ancient clock and the rattle of the wind against the grimy windows. Marcia dragged herself upright, every movement an ordeal, every joint stiff and aching. She staggered out into the storm once more, pulling the hoodie tight around herself, but it was useless against the merciless cold that cut straight through to her bones. The world was a blur of white and gray and pain. By the time she reached her employer's warehouse, it was long past the final deadline. The delivery manager, a squat man with a permanent sneer etched into his fleshy face, met her at the door, arms crossed, a look of pure disgust flashing in his small, piggy eyes. "You're late, Brown," the man barked, voice sharp and cold. "Real late. You know what that means." Marcia tried to explain, tried to tell him about the storm, about the man, about the ambulance, but the words came out slurred and broken from exhaustion and cold, and the manager just shook his head, already turning away. "Save it," he snapped over his shoulder. "Turn in your gear, you're done here." And just like that, the thin thread Marcia had been clinging to snapped. No job, no money, no hope of paying rent next week, no way to afford Tiana's next round of medication. The future she had fought so hard to keep from crumbling now collapsed around her, swift and brutal and merciless as the storm outside. She stumbled home through the frozen streets, the city's lights blurry and cruel in the distance, her body numb, her heart heavier than it had ever been. When she pushed open the door to their apartment, the blast of cold that hit her made her stomach turn. The heating must have finally given out completely. Tiana sat on the couch, bundled up in blankets, her small, pale face lighting up when she saw her. "Marcia, you're back!" she chirped, her voice thin but filled with innocent hope. She didn't know. She didn't know her sister had failed her. She didn't know the eviction notice probably wasn't far off. She didn't know that the precious little security they had was gone, stolen by a single night's act of kindness. Marcia forced a smile, kneeling by her side, taking her tiny cold hands in her rough frozen ones. "I'm back, little sis," she said hoarsely, voice breaking under the weight of everything she couldn't say. and as Tiana beamed at her, trusting, loving, unaware, Marcia pressed her forehead against her sister's hand and let the silent tears she had been holding back for so long finally fall burning hot against her frozen skin. In that tiny, freezing apartment, under the thin, flickering light bulb, with the storm still raging outside and the future looking darker than ever, Marcia Brown sat with the only thing she had left, the unbreakable bond of family. The stubborn flicker of love that not even the coldest winter could snuff out. The next few days passed in a blur of misery and cold. Marcia scraped together a few deliveries for cash under the table, odd jobs here and there, but it wasn't enough. The landlord banged on the door every morning now, barking threats through the cracked wood, warning Marcia that she had exactly 3 days left to pay up or get out. The final notice for Tiana's medication came too, printed in cold, heartless letters that might as well have been knives in Marcia's chest. She didn't sleep much those nights, lying awake next to Tiana's frail form, staring up at the stained ceiling, wondering where they would go, what she could possibly do next, if there was even a future left for them anymore. On the 4th morning, just as the sun struggled to push its way through the thick gray clouds outside, Marcia was jolted awake by a harsh knocking at the door. Not the angry, impatient pounding of the landlord, but something different, sharper, official. She stumbled to the door, heart racing with a kind of dread that had lived inside her for as long as she could remember, half expecting police or eviction officers. But when she pulled the door open, it wasn't the landlord, it wasn't the police. It was a man in a dark blue suit, crisp and clean despite the muddy slush on the sidewalk, holding a leather briefcase and wearing an expression that was polite but unreadable. "Marcia Brown?" the man asked, his voice firm, professional. Marcia nodded warily, instinctively stepping slightly in front of Tiana, who was peeking out from behind her, her big eyes wide with confusion. The man extended a card. Marcia took it with numb fingers, blinking down at the neatly printed words. "Harrison and Associates, Attorneys at Law." "My client would like to meet with you," the man said simply. "Immediately." Marcia's mind raced. She wasn't in trouble, was she? She hadn't done anything wrong. Maybe someone was suing her, maybe something worse. Her stomach twisted into tight, painful knots, but she knew she didn't have the luxury to refuse. If this was bad news, she needed to know. If there was even a sliver of a chance it was something else, she had to take it. She bundled up as best she could, promised Tiana she would be back soon, and followed the man out into the frozen morning. They drove through the city in a sleek black sedan, far cleaner and newer than anything Marcia had ever ridden in before, the leather seats smooth and cold against her skin. They passed through neighborhoods Marcia had only ever seen on television, the wide tree-lined streets, the giant houses sitting like proud, aloof sentinels behind iron gates. Finally, they pulled up in front of a building so tall and gleaming it seemed to slice the gray sky in half, all steel and glass and quiet, powerful wealth. Marcia followed the lawyer inside, feeling painfully out of place in her threadbare clothes and scuffed boots, every polished marble surface reflecting just how little she belonged here. They rode a silent elevator up to the penthouse floor, where the doors opened onto a vast office, walls of glass overlooking the glittering city, and standing there, behind a massive mahogany desk, was a man Marcia recognized instantly, the man from the car, the man she had dragged through the blizzard, the man she had thought she would never see again. Only now, he was different. No longer a terrified, freezing wreck, but a man of undeniable presence, dressed impeccably in a dark suit, his gray hair neatly combed, his sharp blue eyes focused with a clarity that made Marcia's breath catch. "Ms. Brown," the man said, stepping forward, extending a hand. "Walter Hartman, CEO of Hartman Properties." Marcia shook the hand automatically, still too stunned to speak. "I owe you my life," Walter continued, his voice steady, rich with something Marcia didn't expect. "Respect. You didn't know who I was. You didn't ask for anything. You sacrificed your own safety, your own job, to save a stranger." Marcia opened her mouth, but no words came out. her throat burned, her mind spinning. Walter smiled, a real smile, genuine and warm. "I don't believe in letting debts go unpaid," Walter said simply. He turned to the side and picked up a thick folder from the desk, placing it in Marcia's trembling hands. Marcia flipped it open, and her breath whooshed out in a stunned gasp. A deed to a brand new apartment in a safe neighborhood, fully paid off. A trust fund in Tiana's name, enough to cover all her medical expenses for years. A job offer, full-time, benefits, good pay, at one of Hartman's companies. "I don't want charity," Marcia croaked, the words torn from somewhere deep inside, the old pride and fear clashing inside her. Walter's eyes softened. "It's not charity, Marcia, it's gratitude. It's what you deserve." Marcia stood there, frozen, overwhelmed, tears prickling her eyes. This wasn't just a lifeline. It was a future. Hours later, when she walked through the door of their old apartment for the last time, scooping Tiana into her arms and telling her that everything was going to be okay, better than okay, Marcia finally understood. Sometimes kindness was its own reward. But sometimes, if you were lucky, the world remembered. And sometimes it paid you back in ways bigger than you ever dared dream. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.